My name is Karen Bishke. I'm a graduate student at Lenore Ryan University in Sustainability Studies. I'm currently wrapping up my program and moving to and looking to complete my capstone project in the Morganton Foothills region, and primarily focusing on Lake James area. Water quality is important to me because I use water, as we all do, to grow food. I spend a lot of time recreating in water, kayaking, swimming, and quality water is essential to sustainable communities as well as healthy environments. I am very excited to hear more from Tatiana. Her speech is named Community-Based Water Resource Engagement in the Cottage Groves neighborhood. Tatiana is a Chicago native and a two-time Cornhusker alumna. Tatiana received a Bachelor of Arts degree in Great Plains Studies with minors in Environmental Studies, Community and Regional Planning, and Agribusiness Entrepreneurship. She later returned to pursue a Master of Community and Regional Planning degree, focusing on community engagement and environmental justice. Tatiana has been an integrated water management planner for the Nebraska Department of Natural Resources, a community development planner for the city of Kinston, North Carolina, and currently serves as a program director of Partners for Environmental Justice. Beyond this, Tatiana has several years of experience as an environmental educator and launched Height Environmental Justice and Planning in 2018 to provide public speaking, environmental justice, environmental education, and planning services to interested audiences. I'm very excited to hear what she has to say, and I will turn it on over to her.
Thank you, Karen. I really appreciate that. I almost forgot that I sent such a lovely bio for you all, so it was nice hearing it back. So like was already said, I'm going to be giving a talk on community-based water resource engagement. There we go. And so, like Karen said, I'm currently serving as the program director of Partners for Environmental Justice. It is a nonprofit that is serving areas of the Walnut Creek watershed, which we're primarily focused on Southeast Raleigh, but are currently working on expanding our efforts to serve more areas. However, the project that I'm going to mostly talk about today was a project that I worked on while I was Stormwater Project Coordinator at the UNCG Center for Housing and Community Studies. So the project that we worked on, which was lovely, we just kind of called it the Stormwater Project, is a project that has been funded by the Water Resources Research Institute. It was funded in November of last year for 2 years. And the project is to do community engagement with residents of a neighborhood called Cottage Grove, which is located in the eastern part of Greensboro, to really deal with environmental justice concerns related to 2 unnamed tributaries in the South Buffalo Creek. There had been a lot of water sampling that had already taken place on other parts of South Buffalo Creek and different tributaries that weren't connected to this project. And so there was kind of some hypothesizing that there might be some contamination going on in these unnamed tributaries and some issues that needs to be concerned as or needs to be addressed as a result of that. And so that's really what this project was focusing on. So the neighborhood is located on 13 acres, which is adjacent to an old landfill. This was a pre-regulatory landfill. So as of now, landfills are regulated such that they have an encasement, so that if they are taken out of commission underground, there's something around them that's protecting the litter and the debris from leaking out into the soil, into the water. But unfortunately, this particular landfill is pre-regulatory, so it does not have any sort of enclosure around it. And so there had been some spillage that was happening, causing contamination in the soil at local parks and in the waterways connected to this Cottage Grove neighborhood. So this is a map of Cottage Grove. There are 2 primary parks in the neighborhood. There's the Apache Street Park, and then there's the Bingham Park. Bingham Park in previous years has actually been closed down, and they had to ask people not to visit that park just because of the contamination of the soil. The state had done some testing and they found that the soil there was not safe. And so they had actually asked people a few years back to stay away. There are some articles that were published in the news about Bingham Park and the closures that took place. And actually, while I was working on this project, as I was talking to neighbors and asking about, I was asking, how often are people engaging with Bingham Park? Are people concerned about the landfill? And a lot of people didn't even know that this was an issue, even now, even with the exposure that was gotten from the announcements and things like that. People were still saying, we didn't even know that that's a thing that even happened. And some residents, were like, we didn't even know about this landfill situation. They might be experiencing some of the side effects of it, but didn't know that the community was actually developed adjacent to an old landfill. So there were several goals with the project. One of the goals was to engage residents of Cottage Grove. So Cottage Grove is a predominantly Black community, over 80% Black, but there's also a sizable Latinx and Asian American population as well. So it's a largely community of color. And we really wanted to engage them in this environmental project. There was some feedback happening from members of the community, just saying, there's odors that we're noticing. We're noticing that things aren't getting addressed in terms of the environment, in terms of the park. And so there were some folks, in particular those who are already active in neighborhood associations and things of that nature, who were saying, we see a problem, we want to do something about this. But we really wanted to engage other folks as well who maybe weren't already engaged in some other way and get them involved in this project and really make it a neighborhood effort. We also wanted to build community capacity to organize and advocate for green initiatives. So like I said earlier, this project was only funded for 2 years. And so sometimes, organizations will get money to be able to do a project, but then what happens when that project is over? How does it get sustained? How does the work that was associated with that project continue? How much efficacy do people feel around taking on these issues? And so we wanted to be able to say, hey, if we don't get funding to continue this project, what can be done to make sure that the community is able to really take the reins of this, build it? Do the community wants to be able to continue this project just in case, we might not be able to be here forever. And so how can we make sure that residents are really champions for their own community and are able to give them the tools to do whatever they want to do with their neighborhood in terms of environment and water resources? Another thing was to foster relationships between residents and the city of Greensboro, and increase the trust with residents. One of the issues, not just in this project, but in other projects that I've noticed, is people just having a general mistrust of the government. And sometimes, maybe rightfully so. If, in particular with this project, people were asking, why do we have to do litter cleanups? Why isn't the city already doing this? Why isn't the state already doing this? Why do we have to advocate for these projects? Why don't they recognize that there's a contamination and do the cleanup themselves? Why do we have to make a case? Why do we have to build all this data? Why do we have to do this when the government should already be doing it without us asking? We pay taxes, that kind of thing. And so there's a lot of mistrust when things of that nature are happening, when they feel like, the government isn't being held accountable, isn't doing things they're supposed to be doing to maintain infrastructure that is owned by the government. So that is one of the things that we wanted to do was to increase trust between the city level government and also state officials. And then also increase residents' knowledge of riparian ecology. So we wanted to do some education programs around this for all age groups. So getting some youth education initiatives, as well as maybe some teen and some adult, and then getting even seniors engaged all across the spectrum, giving people the knowledge about riparian ecology so that they could be informed as they hopefully champion environmental efforts in the community. So in addition to myself, we had two lovely students who are working on this project. So on the left, you'll see D'Amico Guy, who is hired temporarily as a student. He is in biological engineering at North Carolina A&T, who's working on some of the oral history components of the project, as well as assisting with developing educational materials and things of that nature. And then on the right is Kiana Quaskut, who is a senior in Peace and Conflict Studies with a minor in African American Studies at UNCG, who came on just for this past summer to really help with delivering some of the educational things we were doing, and helping with collecting water samples, helping with delivering outreach events and things of that nature. So these two were very, very instrumental in the success of the project and everything that was able to get done over the course of this summer, which we're now out of summer. It's still weird to say this past summer because we're in fall now. So the first piece was that community engaged education. That's the first piece of the project. So that included program development. One of the major things we wanted to do was to develop a program of, what sort of actual activities are we doing to teach youngsters about water resources, about riparian ecology. Are we doing an after-school program? Are we doing a program in schools, out of schools? What's going to be the content? What are they going to learn about? What sort of activities are they going to engage in? So all of that had to be developed from the ground up. CHCS, Center for Housing and Community Studies, didn't have any sort of environmental programming before getting this funding from WRI. The PI, Stephen Sills, who's the director of the Center for Housing and Community Studies, has been very active in the Cottage Grove community. Even before the center was founded, he was already active in that community for a year. But it was on other issues, such as health, such as tenants' rights, things of that nature. And so this environmental piece was all new. So we had to develop a program from the ground up, and then pilot it at the Cottage Gardens Resource Center. The Cottage Gardens Resource Center is in an apartment community called Cottage Gardens, which is situated in between Bingham Park and Apache Park that I mentioned earlier. And there's already some after-school programming going on there. And so it was a good place to kind of try to work with students out of there and get those students engaged in some of this environmental education piece to kind of add some more robustness to what they were already, the support that they were already getting at the Cottage Gardens Resource Center. And then we ended up doing some virtual education programming as well. That was not the intention. As we were initially planning this program, we were planning, we wanted to in-person stuff. It's environmental education. We want to get folks outdoors. We want to get folks experiencing the nature and environment and their community. But unfortunately, because of COVID-19, as everyone knows, we had to do a pivot. And so I was engaged in some community calls with other environmental educators around the state, hearing about what other folks are doing to try to offer virtual programming. And so luckily we were able to make a strong transition and do some socially distant work and do some virtual education programs as well. So that virtual education program that I mentioned was called Water Warriors. So Water Warriors was a 5-week program. We met 3 times a week with kiddos who just wanted to learn about water resources. Initially, the program was supposed to be for ages 11 through 14, and it was developed with that age group in mind. But we were getting folks, we had at least 4 folks off the top of my head who were outside of the age range, but they still wanted to participate. We had a max registration of 25, and since we hadn't exceeded our max registration, we decided to let those folks in who were outside of the age group. So we ended up having really a 1st through 12th program where we had our youngest participant was 8 and the oldest one was 17. So it was a huge gap that was larger than we intended. But that's how things turned out. We had 14 folks sign up for the program, and we might have engagement on the most that we would get log on a particular Zoom session was 9. Sometimes we just had 1 kiddo log on. It just depended. A lot of them had a lot of other obligations and things going on in summer. They're taking family trips, or they're engaged in other different programs in the summer as well. So they would let me know if they weren't able to make it. But on a good day, we still had pretty good engagement from students, and they were really involved. And I think some of the older ones added some good context and conversation to the program. So these are some photos from the program. We did a lot. I've like was said in my bio, I've been doing environmental education since long term, since I dipped my toes in 2009, but have really been doing it since 2013. And this is the first time that I've ever done any virtual programming. So this was very new. And then the two folks on my team hadn't really done environmental education at all. So this was a learning experience for all of us, as well as, the participants who were having this first time experience for them as well. So we tried to use the same lessons that would have been done in person, but just try to figure out a way to modify it and do it virtually. We had activity kits. So at the Cottage Gardens Resource Center, parents would come and then pick up a kit that had everything that they would need to do some activities from home. And then we would log on Zoom 3 times a week, and they would pull out the stuff that they needed from their kit for that particular day. And we would go through the activity for an hour and a half. So we would kind of start with like a just get to know you, icebreaker, just fun little game that was unrelated. And then we would do an hour of water resource education. So we, in this top left photo, we were using a web-based water resource educational platform from the EPA that was good for this kind of thing. We were able to do it together. In the bottom left, you'll see some plants there. We made terrariums. I don't know if you'll be able to see this. I still have with my virtual background, it's a little wonky, but I still have the sample terrarium that we made with them to show them, what does an ecosystem consist of? Let's make one. That was really their favorite activity, was making the terrariums. And we were able to do that. The whole project is funded by WRI, but we were able to do that particular activity because of some side funds I was able to get from the environmental educators of North Carolina. Then in this bottom photo, we did this rainbow in a cup activity to talk about just the way that water moves and its properties and things of that nature. So we were able to still do some experiential education programs with them and really learn and get through stuff. And some of the most engaged students were some of the younger ones. I told Justice, who was one of our 8-year-olds, that she was the MVP at the end of camp when we were doing our rewards. And then we also were able to partner with some other organizations. So in the top left, there is a nonprofit out of DC called the Urban Adventure Squad. And we were fortunate enough to have them. They approached me wanting a guest educator for a session that they were doing, because they were doing some virtual programming with students in DC about the Anacostia River, and they wanted to have a conversation about what's going on in other places. So we were able to get on Zoom and talk about what's going on in North Carolina. And as a part of that partnership, I said, hey, if your students are going to learn about what we're doing in North Carolina, can my students come to some of your stuff and hear about what you're doing? They didn't even know that I had a program going on. So they were like, what's your program? So we were able to merge programs for a week. And our students from North Carolina were able to attend their sessions and learn about the Anacostia River and about environmental justice. And it was a really good experience. And then we also did, this is one of our kits from one of the weeks where we did coral reefs education and learned about how to make model coral reefs and with straws and clay and things like that. That was another one that was done with the support of the environmental educators of North Carolina. So then we had the community engaged outreach. So we had networking with other environmental justice organizations. So there was some collaboration with Climate Action NC. They actually, a conversation with them is what led to us realizing that we could do a socially distant Workday. We had to cancel one of our Workdays in March, but because of that collaboration and that conversation, we figured out a way that we could do it socially distant and still at least get one going this summer. We had some collaboration with different neighborhood associations. So we would go to the neighborhood association meetings and just engage with those issues. We talked about what folks wanted to see in terms of the greenways, what would be their ideal greenway, what would be their ideal blueway, what are some of the amenities that they would like, what are some of the things that they don't like, really sort of a participatory meeting to hear from the residents about where to see the community go, so that as we're compiling data, as we're working in the community, we can try to help them to reach whatever goals that they already have. And so out of a meeting that we had in March, the big thing that came out of that was the smell. People were saying there's a smell coming off of the creek, that if we were going to figure out what's priority number one, that would be priority number one, is handling that. So that was something that came out of that, out of the March meeting. And those are set to happen quarterly. And then connection with community non-government organizations. One thing that was important to me was when working with communities, to not just ask them to engage in whatever project that we were doing, but also to be there and support for other projects that were going on in the neighborhood. So it's really a more holistic approach. There was the community development group, and there is a health clinic that one of the doctors there was saying, you know, let's talk about how is environmental justice related to the asthma issues in the community. That's a big issue, and how can we get more folks interested in medical careers? And that was something she was interested in working on. There were community pickup days for food because of COVID-19, and so I wanted to help and go volunteer with that. There was a community garden that's very, very, very related to just the overall environment in the community. So even though that wasn't a project of ours, I wanted to be supportive of that as well. And then leveraging the standing housing hangout. So the Center for Housing and Community Studies does once a month what's called a housing hangout, when people get together and talk about different community issues. And so we did one in June that was about environmental justice, and we had different panelists come and talk about environmental justice, and people ask questions, and it was a really good experience. We had some representatives from the state, and we had some community organizers, Brenda and Omega Wilson. We had Crystal Cavalier, and came and talked about the indigenous perspective. We had a faculty member from UNCG, so a good broad spectrum of conversation around environmental justice issues. And then there was the water, the citizen science piece. So we had water sampling efforts that were going on. We wanted to have more people engaged in the water sampling efforts. Unfortunately, that had to be scaled back just because of COVID-19. When a lot of this was going on, we're still under, like, now we're in phase 2.5, but at the time, there were a lot of restrictions, and even now there's still some questions about, you know, what's safe, but so we had to kind of rethink how we were going to do that. So we had borrowed a piece of equipment from one of the faculty named Sarah on campus, who had some very expensive water sampling equipment, and she loaned it to us for the summer. And the student Kiana used that and went out weekly and went to the South Buffalo Creek and took water samples and was keeping a record of that. And there's also a wildlife log, so we can compare, you know, what's the contamination level in the creek, also with what's going on with the wildlife, and see if there was anything going on there. But then we also had home water sampling kits, which we were able to integrate that into the educational program that we did. We were prioritizing students who lived in the Cottage Grove community for the water resource education program. But since we did full registration, we didn't have to turn anybody away who wasn't in the neighborhood or anything like that. But we gave them all water sampling kits, and they went home, and we had them do 2 tests where they tested the water inside of their house and then tested the water outside of their house, and then compared it to see if there was any difference. So there was a lot of water sampling that went on as part of this project. We wanted to do some soil sampling. So that actually is kind of the phase 2 for this project, is what's going on with the soil as well. And actually the center was just getting some funding as I was exiting the project to continue into a phase 2 and to start doing some soil sampling. So hopefully that should be forthcoming in 2021. And then, like I said, the wildlife observations. So then there was a lot of research going on around the project. So we had surveys, which before COVID, we were able to do some canvassing and go around and ask people to fill out these surveys just about their perceptions of water and environment in the community, their perceptions of flooding, their perceptions of safety in terms of the waterways and things like that. Then we had this oral history component, which we had to rethink how that went too. So we ended up doing phone interviews for the oral histories instead of in person, which luckily we're in 2021 because we were able to find, I did not know about this, but there are apps where you can record phone conversations. I didn't know about this because I don't try to record phone conversations, but so we were still able to get that data so that it could be transcribed by just recording it with this app, which D'Amico found. So I was grateful for him for that. And that's actually where some of that conversation came out, where people were saying, you know, we didn't even know about some of this stuff. Somebody said, I've been in the community we were only interviewing long-term residents, so over 20 years. And somebody had been in the community for something like 50 years. And she said that she didn't even know that the community was next to a landfill until recently, like in the last couple of years. And so I was like, whoa, just kind of blown away that people are living somewhere where there's this issue that's affecting the soil, that's affecting the water, and they don't even know. So they're not even in a position to make an informed decision about how to proceed, about how to live, when that knowledge isn't even there. Then the participatory community meetings that I mentioned, kind of integrating with the neighborhood association meeting, and then getting some additional support. So Kiana, who I mentioned, was actually funded for the summer by the Undergraduate Research and Scholarship Office at UNCG, so that they were able to pay a stipend to support her time for 10 hours a week for the summer. And then, like I said, the RWJF, which should be supporting phase 2 of the project with soil sampling and some other engagement around the project as well. There is the Riparian Clean-Up aspect of the project. So the March one got canceled, unfortunately, but we were able to do the June one socially distantly. So this was able to happen with the partnership of other folks in the community. The Greensboro Water Resources Department actually has an Adopt a Stream program. And so we are seeking to adopt the stream. And so with that, they will actually, if you're doing a cleanup, even before it's officially adopted, you have to do 4 cleanups before it can be officially adopted. But they will provide bags and they will provide gloves to support cleanups. So that was something that was really helpful for us, especially on a tight, budget funded by a grant. To be able to have the city offer that support by way of providing some of the supplies was extremely helpful. And then there's Collaborative Cottage Grove, which is a coalition of different organizations in the community, including a housing nonprofit, the community, New Hope Community Development Group, which I have listed here as a part of the collaborative, different folks, churches coming together to deal with issues in Cottage Grove. And so that group was really instrumental in helping us to distribute information about the event, to get feedback from the community in terms of what they would or wouldn't like to see. That's how some of that conversation came up about, why do we even have to do this? Why isn't the city cleaning up this park? Why isn't the city cleaning up this waterway? That's public land. Why should we have to do it? So that kind of stuff. And then different community members. So the project has funding for 3 community liaisons. It was 4 originally, but we converted one of the positions to support the 5-week environmental education program about water resources that happened this summer. But 3 community liaisons. And so we had community liaisons going out, handing out flyers about different stuff that we were doing. And some folks, while, digital might be great, like there were some digital boards and things we wanted to advertise on, but as people weren't leaving out as much, I think about the feasibility of that. And then the folks who might not, we post everything on social media, but some folks aren't on social media, especially when you have, older residents. So we still had to supplement with flyers. And so we had community liaisons help with that. And they got $500 for a year of helping with little tasks like handing out flyers or other things, and paid out in small increments with each task that they do. And so then service learning groups. So there was 2. There's one at North Carolina A&T that we connected with to try to get volunteers from there. Unfortunately, that ended up not panning out just because the campus ended up getting shut down because of COVID-19. And then there's another group at UNCG that they have actually groups of students that one day a year in August, they want, different service projects that people can engage in. So we, coordinated with them of how can we get students from this day involved. And they actually have a group of students in something called Catalyst program, and they are particularly interested in environmental justice just coincidentally. And so that ended up being a good connection as well for how can we engage with students moving forward and get students involved in this effort as well. So here is some photos from our socially distant June Workday. So we had folks, if folks weren't in the same household, we asked them to clean up different parts of the creek. Most of the folks that we had actually came together, though. They came in groups. So we had, I think, 4 households of folks, which totaled there were about 12 of us, including staff. So we had 1 volunteer from the neighborhood association man the check-in desk, and then the rest of us were out, boots on the ground, picking up stuff. So that was really great, and we ended up picking up 25 bags of litter, and we also got some interesting items. There was a shopping cart. There were clothing items. There was wire from a box spring. There were, dishes, just lots of weird stuff in there that we were able to get all of that cleaned out. And the city then came by and picked up all of the bags and the shopping cart and this weird wooden thing that's inside of the shopping cart. Lots of interesting things that got picked up. They asked us to take pictures. So I think they ended up posting a lot of pictures onto the Greensboro Water Resources Facebook page as well from the event. So what's next? Like I said, I'm no longer, this was a project that I was working on with the Center for Housing Community Studies, but I'm no longer engaged with that project anymore. There are some different folks who have taken on the reins to continue that project. But I still have some similar things going on. With Partners for Environmental Justice, we do cleanups in Southeast Raleigh and the Walnut Creek watershed. So different part of the state, but still we'll be doing some cleanups and still engaging youth. Doing some educational programs. We're launching the Raleigh Watershed Learning Network to engage adults in becoming water stewards in their communities. And the participants in that program will get a $400 stipend upon completion. So we're very excited about that, about getting people the tools and the skills that they need to keep making a difference in their community, educating them about water resources, educating them about environmental justice, educating them about community engagement, and then actually getting folks involved and hopefully feeling like they have, the ability to really make a difference on these things. So I'll stop there and open it up to questions. We only have 10 minutes. I'm sorry, but here's my contact information. If I don't get through all the questions today, if folks want to reach out with questions, feel free. This is also PEJ's website and social media, so feel free to connect with us on there as well.
Great. Thank you so much, Tatiana. That is a wonderful presentation about such an amazing project that you've been managing for the past while. And I'm going to start a question, and I'd like to remind the audience you can post questions in the Q&A or if you want to raise a hand, we could potentially call on you. But I have a question. The first thing I just want to point out that the number one word that sticks out to me about the way you engaged and managed this project is leverage. You really kind of, and partnership, and you did such a great job in reaching out into various community leader groups and working with lots of efforts that were already going on. And my question is, you did surveys, and I'm wondering what you learned from the surveys. And I'm also, related to that, I'm wondering, there's this concept called green gentrification, where in environmental justice, there's community improvement, and there's a fine balance between kind of where is community improvement and the potential to displace people as communities improve in certain ways. And I'm just wondering if that is something that came out of the surveys, if there was any perception of that phenomenon and or concern about that, and is that something that you as a team collectively considered and aimed to address, and if so, how?
Yeah, no one mentioned anything of that nature in the surveys, and it didn't really. I mean, there was some room for, what is the most important issue for you as it pertains to environment in the survey, where that could have come out. But it didn't. No one mentioned that concept. People just kind of said, we're concerned about flooding, or we are not happy with the environment, that kind of thing. We're concerned about litter, that kind of thing. Like, there was some kind of, is this a priority for you? Is this not a priority for you kind of questions? And some people said either yes or no. And then even when we asked the open-ended question, some people were kind of like, I don't know. So they didn't even, on the non-multiple choice, they didn't necessarily even have. So I think that might speak to who even knows about that, that concept. Is that something that gets talked about only if you're super knowledgeable? Is that something that only gets talked about in certain circles? But with what we're doing, like educational programs and cleanups and things, I don't think are the kind of bigger things that lead to that level of gentrification. I think more larger scale kind of stuff, and developments and things like that. Like if there was a huge new nice park that got put in, people like living by parks. Parks improve property values. So maybe if there were a lot of big, nice changes that happened with Bingham Park or something like that, where it got really turned around, something like that could happen. But at this level and what we were doing, we didn't think that was going to be a big concern. But I will say that while it didn't come out in this project, that is something that's being talked about in Raleigh with the work that I'm transitioning to now. There are community folks who are drafting, as we speak, community benefits agreements to say, hey, if you're going to come in and do this kind of work, what promises are you making to the community? What promises are you making that the benefits will be reaped by the people who currently live here and not by bourgeoisie folks who will move in or whatever? And what kind of covenants can we have? What kind of agreements can we make in terms of conditional zoning or that kind of thing to make sure that the community is protected and that things like green gentrification don't happen?
Great. Thank you very much. I think Karen's going to ask a question from the audience.
Okay.
You're muted, Karen.
Okay, I'm unmuted now. This question is from Anna Miller. She said, thank you so much. Do you have any tips for engaging with students through a virtual media and converting activities or lessons for home kits?
Mm-hmm. I think there are still ways that students can be engaged virtually, not in the cleanup process. And actually, I didn't mention this, but that happened with D'Amico. D'Amico, I said he was a student at North Carolina A&T, but he had gone back home to Charlotte when campus shut down at A&T, and he was still working with us all summer from Charlotte. So I had him engaged in helping to come up with games for us to do on Zoom. He created the educational handout that we used for the June Workday. Originally, when we were going to do an in-person Workday, we would have had a speaker come and talk about something educational before going out and cleaning up. But because we were keeping it all outdoors and we weren't, wanting people to be sitting close to each other to do any sort of speech, we did just an educational handout that we put into kits with a snack and, gloves, whatever people were going to need for the day. So he made that handout from Charlotte, was engaged in... he made all of the certificates that we did for the completion of the water program. He came up with questions for our virtual trivia that we did for the online water resource education. So he helped with the oral history project and interviewing people. That was on the phone. So lots of ways that if you were to get a student, I don't know about a group of students, but a couple students, a student or two or three to work on different projects related to advancing the overall goal, it can absolutely be done remotely. And for the kids, I think it really helped us that the program was free, nobody had to pay, and that we had all of the materials just ready to hand out to folks. I think helped a lot. Sometimes I did have to go and drop off kits, so that's something to be aware of. We thought everybody would just come and pick them up. But then sometimes I'll have students showing up and they didn't have their kit and they can't engage in the project. They don't have it. So I ended up having to do some drop-offs as well pretty frequently. Every week I have to drop off some to somebody. So I'm just being mindful of that with the kids.
Great. I'm wondering, you talked about the survival of a program over time, and I know that you've now stepped away and you have some ideas about how this might continue. But what are your thoughts about what might happen, and what else might be needed to make this thing successful over the long haul? Do you have some insights about that, or?
Yeah, I think there needs to be more money. With the Workday that we had, you may have noticed in the photos, almost all of our volunteers were white. And that is not reflective of the residents in the community, because none of them lived in the community who showed up to the Workday. So, and what I didn't know is that before I started the project, the community had made it pretty clear that they didn't want to participate in Workdays because there was no benefit for them tangibly in the moment. And so something that was suggested was, you know, why don't we do little like stipends for people who show up? The director of the New Hope Community Development Group actually was like, you know, neighbors will show up if there's like a little stipend or something, you know, maybe you get $10 an hour or something to show up and clean for 2 hours. I was thinking also a cookout might be good, make it more of a fun experience. Just cleaning up a stream might be fun for environmentalists, but if you don't identify as an environmentalist, you probably don't think that's fun. So I think make it into more of a fun event, give some sort of, you know, immediate benefit. Another thing was that the community development director said was, please do not do gift cards, especially don't do gift cards to Walmart, because that's something that was happening a lot with other projects, is that it was gift cards to Walmart, and people, the Walmarts are really far. They're across town. Everybody doesn't have a car. So everybody doesn't want to go to Walmart across town with their gift card. They want cash. So definitely just more resources, and just, I think even when we try our hardest to be community engaged, there's still more that can be done to make sure that the project is reflecting what the community wants it to reflect. And that it looks like what they want it to look like. And so I think there's more that can be done to do that, but it takes people who really want that, and it takes resources to make sure that you don't have to say no because we don't have the resources to support this change.
Great. Well, thank you so much. It's been wonderful hearing from you and hearing about your insights. Since there are 2 minutes left, I'm wondering if you want to tell us a quick version of what your dissertation proposal reflected, and where we see you going as you move through your program.
Yeah, so I'm in agricultural and extension education. I would say I'm the only person in the department who identifies as an environmental educator. Other folks probably identify as agricultural educators, or they're doing something with extension that's not environment, natural resources focused. So for me, I'm really interested in offering environmental education programs, and particularly culturally relevant environmental education. So I'm looking at doing using Afrocentric pedagogy, which is a teaching technique that places, you know, Afro-diasporic people at the center, and has been used in school systems, but I haven't seen a lot of use in settings like mine, you know, an outdoor education program, an environmental education program. So using that. And there's been a lot of people talking about multicultural environmental education conceptually, even some folks doing what they see as multicultural environmental education. But I'm talking about using that in ways that I don't think are problematic, which some of the stuff I've seen seems quite problematic to me. So I'll be implementing some culturally relevant programs with urban youth, and hopefully they'll get a lot out of the program, and just kind of evaluating the program and seeing what the outcomes are for students.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much. The crowd is going wild. You can tell. Can you hear them? It's shaking. My walls are shaking.
Luckily, my dogs haven't barked this whole time. Thank goodness.
Yeah. Well, that's good for them and good for all of us, although we'd like to know your dogs. But thank you so much. That was wonderful. We'll look forward to learning more from you in the future as you work on that dissertation.